G'day all, it's Nathan here from FVR Contracting. I'm currently up in a remote area on Cape York conducting a feral pig control program which is related to sea turtle nest predation, so destroying feral pigs that are out on the beaches, causing damage and impacting sea turtle populations. Right at the moment we're in Overwatch on a beach which is pretty quiet, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to have a bit of a chat about the 300 Blackout cartridge. So I've had quite a few questions over social media over the last couple of weeks pertaining to the cartridge, the nature of it, the projectiles used, velocities, how effective it is, and in general whether it's a good choice as a general purpose cartridge for hunting under Australian conditions. So get that one right out of the way up front. I actually don't think the 300 Blackout is a particularly good choice for general purpose hunting in Australia. It is an interesting little cartridge, but it has a number of limitations which limit its utility for general purpose use. So you can see there is a Hornady load, so it's only a very small case. This is a Hornady factory load with 110 grain VMAX projectile. So these projectiles are coming out of this rifle which I have here, which is a 16-inch barreled AR-15, obviously not the type of thing that everyone's going to be using with one of these, but indicative of the barrel length often utilised with this case, and often quite a bit shorter. But this is running at about 2,390 feet per second on average using these projectiles. So it's not particularly fast, and this is a fairly light offering in terms of the projectile, which is deliberate to keep the projectile speed up. So the 300 Blackout comes in a range of different options. Anything from these sort of 110 grain loads, you can load them with 90 grain projectiles if that's your thing, right up to 180, 190 grain projectiles, and and a little bit heavier for use with in a subsonic type of role. So the cartridge itself is basically a 223 Remington necked out to 30 caliber. There's not a lot of other changes involved, and it was designed so that the cartridge could be used on an AR-15 platform, and with many things of that nature it's got a little bit of a cult following, and so now there's a range of different manufacturers who chamber all sorts of different rifles for this cartridge. So the key limitation with the 300 Blackout is physics. So if you look at the case, it's pretty small. There's not a lot of powder capacity behind it, and therefore there's only so much speed you're ever going to be able to generate with this case. So it is pretty effective in a number of scenarios, but as a general purpose cartridge I wouldn't say it's really the ideal choice. So for me, I'm running anywhere between 110 grain and 135 grain projectiles, and they vary in velocity from around 2100 feet per second up to 2390. In those supersonic sort of performance zones, and the cartridge performs well when you use it within a limitation, and its limitation from my perspective, having used it now on sort of around 700 or 800 feral animals in various roles, is around 60 to 70 metres is where this cartridge shines. Once you go past that sort of range, depending on the projectile and how you've loaded it, the performance drops off. And I think the primary issue to do with that is that the cartridge is fairly slow, and it doesn't offer hydrostatic shot when it hits the target. So from a terminal ballistics point of view, projectiles need to, at impact, be at around 2400 feet per second to have some degree of hydrostatic shock, which is basically that shock through the tissue which transmits through the animal and drops it instantly. Other than when you're sort of below those velocities and you don't have hydrostatic shock, the cartridge can still be quite effective, as a number of cartridges are, but they certainly don't tend to kill as quickly. And that really is the bracket of where a 300 Blackout is. So there's a lot of hype that comes out of the US market talking about all of the various things that this cartridge can do, and primarily because there's a very strong following with AR-15s over there, and it's it's compared to all the different options over there in terms of 223 Remington, your 6.5 Grendels, all the different ways you can build an AR for various levels of performance and different uses. And so people have gotten right into this, but in reality there's just no free lunch with physics. So you put a heavier projectile in it, you reduce the powder space, there's only so much you can do to manipulate velocity using powder speeds, burn rates, barrel lengths, etc. And the reality is it's just not a fast cartridge. So It performs well at close ranges. It's certainly useful in the niche where I predominantly use it, which is as a close range thermal cartridge. But it does tend to lack versatility, and certainly it's not a cartridge that I would recommend engaging any form of animal, whether feral or game, without sort of beyond 100, 120 metres, and you'll notice a significant drop in performance out there. So it shoots flat enough to that point, but in reality it doesn't achieve a great effect out at those distances. So it's good for short range use with very careful shot placement, but you know, as I said, not the type of thing I'd be regarding as an all-rounder. If you're after an all-rounder, you know, certainly you need to be looking more in the 308 type bracket or thereabouts. This does not turn these type of platforms into 308 level performance. It's not in that bracket at all. So an interesting cartridge, an interesting case, useful in that close range niche, but certainly, as I said, not something probably to be considered as an ideal choice for the you know, for the person who wants to have one cartridge that does it all. Anyway, if you have any questions on the Blackout or its performance levels, or any particular comments, feel free to put those up. You know, you will see a lot of stuff on these on US forums talking about these fantastic results that they've had using the Blackout out of a range of different platforms, but my experience has been that that's not really the case, and you know, some of that advice that is provided on those types of forums or reviews or whatever is a little bit contradictory. So they talk about using heavier 308 bullets up to that 150 grain mark, etc., to increase the performance, but in reality you're actually just slowing everything down, so you get better penetration, but you don't really have great terminal ballistics in terms of the shock being put on the animal, or the wound channels created. So therefore the actual physical killing of the animal, the destruction of the animal, tends to be a little bit slower. Anyway, feel free to ask any questions if you have any, if that hasn't covered any of the points that anyone's interested in. But yeah, hopefully useful information, and yeah, thanks.